Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from London by Louise Winstanley. She's the Program and Advocacy Manager at ABColombia, a group working to improve human rights in Colombia. And also in London, we have Latin America analyst and journalist Javier Farje. I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers. Javier, let me begin with you. Is the Farc right in abandoning their campaign for now?
No, because, well, I understand why they fear for their own security. This is not the first time that disbanded guerrillas who took part in the political process in Colombia have been threatened by violence. It happened in the past. So I imagine that they are concerned about their own security. We mustn't forget that in the 1980s, many people who joined the political process from the guerrilla and formed the Unión Patriótica, the Patriotic Union, were killed and wiped out. So they are fear that it is the case. However, it is counterproductive for them to do that, because what the Colombian people need to do, the people who don't trust them, and let's face it, the FARC are not trusted by the Colombian people, they need to see the political side of the FARC, the political speech of the FARC, the political campaigning of the FARC, the political proposals they are making to improve the situation in Colombia. If they suspend this campaign, people are going to still stick to the old image of the old violent group, an extremely violent group that they know until now. So I think that in a way I understand the concerns they have about their own security, because again, this has happened before in the past in the political process in Colombia, when guerrillas tried to reintegrate into the civilian society and they were killed. But at the same time, they have to be aware that unless the Colombian people listen to the proposal they have to make and listen to the political side of the FARC, then people will not be convinced. And at the moment, according to the opinion polls, they are not particularly popular among the population in Colombia.
Yeah, not very popular at all. And just a reminder that the majority voted against that 2016 peace deal with them that the president pushed through. Louise, was it a smart idea for them to suspend their campaign? And is it going to unravel the peace process?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily going to unravel the peace process, because there is considerable support in the country for the process. Although I know you mentioned that there was a majority in the referendum on the peace deal voting no, what we have to remember is that majority was very small, and that was a clear indication of quite a lot of division and polarization in the country. So I don't think it's going to unravel, but we're at a very delicate stage in the peace process, one has to admit. And no guerrilla group actually agrees to a negotiated end to the war unless they have the prospect of going into politics and having a political aspect to the
right.
Yeah. But one of the things I think you should remember is that it won't mean that there will be no seats for the FARC. The FARC, according to the peace accord, have 10 seats in the Congress. Right. So they're guaranteed those 10 seats. What the FARC are doing at the moment is that they put out 74 candidates in order to boost that number that they would have in the Congress. So they will not have no representation. But the worrying factor is that they're not able to campaign openly.
Yeah, and just for clarity, so we have congressional elections in March and presidential elections in May. Timoshenko, the man they call Timoshenko, Rodrigo Londoño, had said that he wasn't going to run for president. Then he said he was, and now he suspended his campaign. I want you, Javier, to have a little listen to former President Alvaro Uribe, who was against this peace deal. Have a little listen to him vis-a-vis the FARC.
We can't allow Colombia to become a second Venezuela. Santos and the FARC shouldn't be dreaming about this going their way. We are going to stand up to this. What social justice has socialism brought to the world? None.
Okay, so he's standing firm. He's been against this process. And I think partly some of the arguments that support him also add, listen, what did the FARC expect? 200,000 people died, right? There was terrible, terrible civil war. Did they expect to just be absorbed back into the political process and be welcomed with roses and chocolates? You know, people are going to pelt you with stones. People are going to attack you. You're going to be vulnerable like any other politician, particularly if you're the FARC. Is that a credible argument?
Well, I mean, I understand that position. By the way, the threshold during the referendum was so low that you cannot possibly assess the fact that the majority of people in Colombia, in terms of the general population, would have been against the peace process. But that's by the by, because it is irrelevant now. The problem with President Uribe, who wanted to reach a peace agreement with the Farc, and he couldn't do that because he tried during in the early days of his presidency. It didn't work out, and he was particularly annoyed that Santos did it and he didn't, is that it would be a setback in the peace process. Now, the Farc have given up the weapons and they have handed over the arsenal. It would make it very difficult for them to go back to the armed struggle because they know that they have no possibility of success anywhere. One of the reasons why they decided to go to peace process is because they were losing on the military front, and they realized that they were not going to move any further than that. But at the same time, what they want to do is they want the Colombian people to see the political side of it. The 10 members of Congress that they will keep as a result of the peace process will be crucial, because they will be able to debate in Congress the political arguments they have to improve the life of the Colombians. The threat that it will become a second Venezuela is nonsense, and it's in a way silly, because it's a completely different context in Colombia. The Colombians will never vote for somebody like Chavez, and there's no Chavez in Timochenko is not Hugo Chavez. So it is nonsense to compare that. But obviously, what they want to do, what Uribe wants to do, is use the shadow of Venezuela to frighten people, and that is absolutely dishonest on the part of Mr. Uribe. And if his party wins the parliamentary elections, they could be a setback in the peace process, and that would be bad for everybody. But no, I think the Farc were realistic, and they did not expect people to welcome them, with flowers and all that. They would be a subject of hostility. But they do not want to do is they don't want to be killed. They say one thing is to have the mistrust of the population, especially the urban areas, because they still have some popularity in some of the rural areas they control during the guerrilla time. They are extremely unpopular in the cities. They have to put forward the message, and they have to come out. They have to live with the idea. They have to live with the fact that many people will not want them to, campaigning in the streets, and they have to make a political point rather than a violent point. And it's going to be difficult for them to do it if they suspend the campaign.
Right.
But no, I think they were realistic enough to know that people do not trust them yet, and they have to come up with a political message that will convince people they are serious about the changes in Colombia.
Right. Louise, by the best estimates, 36 Farc members have been killed since the peace deal in 2016. Now, the interesting thing about it is that sometimes it's difficult to ascertain whether this is just sort of mob anger, mob violence, or that maybe there are coordinated campaigns to actually pop these guys off, right? Is it a combination of both?
I think it's far more orchestrated than that. I mean, it's not just the Farc that have been killed. Human rights defenders as well have been killed. 92 defenders were killed last year alone. And the rate at which they're being killed in Colombia has increased rapidly since the signing of the peace deal. And these are people who generally support the peace accord and have supported the whole of the negotiating process. So I think that there are clearly people behind the killing, both of human rights defenders and also of Farc members.
Okay, and Javier, who do you think those people are?
I think it's a combination of both. People who do not want the peace process to succeed, but also people who are afraid of the political influence that the Farc might have. We mustn't forget, in 1985, the Farc signed an agreement with the Belisario Betancourt, the then conservative president, and they formed a political party called Unión Patriótica, the Patriotic Union. It emerged between the Communist Party and the Farc. 3,500 people were killed. Members of that party were killed by security forces, by gunmen, by drug dealers, and they were absolutely wiped out. That was an attempt by the Farc to have a political saying in the politics in Colombia. In 1989, Carlos Pizarro, the candidate of the M19 guerrilla that had signed a peace agreement with the government, was assassinated, and members of his party were wiped out in violence. This is not coincidence. This is a trend. This is part of the history of Colombia. So this is a combination of people who first of all, the war benefited many people. Many people did not like peace because peace was the end of patience for many people. These people would have big interests in trying to destroy the peace process by killing these activists. But also, at the same time, as our other guests said, it's not only FARC people who've been killed. Trade unionists have been killed, community leaders have been killed, people who propose any kind of change in Colombian society are the subject of extreme violence. So it's a combination of, I think, elements from the government who do not want peace, but also sort of private interests who are interested, to maintain a level of violence in Colombia because they thrive in this kind of situation because of their own business interests in the areas where they control. Right. So I think it's a combination of, but this is, I agree with that, this is a coordinated campaign. This is not a one-off, a couple of people being killed. This is a coordinated campaign to wipe out the FARC as a political force, but at the same time to put the peace process in peril.
And as we say, Louise, given that there might be a coordinated campaign to kill FARC members, that there might be powerful vested interests in ensuring that peace doesn't endure when it comes to the FARC, and they don't want to see them sitting in parliament, and that there was a slim majority of Colombians who were against making peace with them. Is it going to be a delicate balancing act now for Santos to provide these guarantees to say, yes, we're going to provide you with security, we're going to take care of you, we're going to look after you, without making it seem as if he is selling out to the FARC?
Well, I'm not sure that you could say that it was being seen as being selling out to the FARC, because they've legitimately had a negotiation, they've legitimately come to an agreement, and part of that agreement includes political participation. So, and obviously you're going to want any guerrilla force to politically participate if you're going to want to sustain a peace accord, a peace agreement. But I think the thing that you have to take into consideration is that the FARC are not the only armed group operating in Colombia. You've got the neo-paramilitary groups that continue to operate, and these are responsible for a considerable number of killings and of the ordinary population, of human rights defenders, etc. And you've also got a second guerrilla group whose talks are in suspension. So dealing with this situation is quite complex at the moment in Colombia. And having the number of paramilitary groups still operating in Colombia makes it extremely difficult. But the government does have to guarantee security for the FARC. Yes, I really think that they do, and I don't think that there's any excuse that Santos could be seen as in any way compromised by doing that.
Javier, are you equally worried by those right-wing paramilitaries that Louise mentioned, and of course the ELN, who seem to have smuggled themselves into the space that was vacated by the FARC, particularly in the jungles in some parts of Colombia?
Yes, but I am worried because these paramilitaries, as our guest said rightly so, they're still very active. They've been active for years and they haven't been disbanded. We mustn't forget that the peace process has not managed to disband all these paramilitary groups that are still wandering around the countryside. In relation to the whole peace process, I doubt it is going to be in danger. Remind me the second part of your question, please, because I didn't hear it very well.
Sure.
Can you remind me the second part of your question?
The ELN, do they worry you as well, given that
yes,
they were seen as a sort of FARC light for so long, but they seem to be getting stronger with drug smuggling and also on the ground, especially in the jungles, they seem to actually be moving into some of the areas that the FARC left.
I get it. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, there is a problem. The problem we have, the ELN is much smaller than FARC. They don't have the same money, the same finance, and the same number of members that the FARC had. That's one element that we have to take into account. So I don't think that they will be able to fill the gap that the FARC left in the areas the FARC used to control, but they will be able to replace some of it. What the damage that the ELN will make would be a political damage to the FARC, because for as long as the ELN continues to exercise violence, people will be reminded of the political violence in Colombia, and the FARC will lose credibility. So it's going to be a psychological as well as political damage for the FARC, because the FARC want to oppose any kind of violence, but they will say, look, there's still groups and violent groups that have a similar ideology to the FARC who are still killing people, so why should we trust the FARC? So and then many international analysts agree that the ELN's violence is going to affect the credibility and the image that the FARC has. In terms of the military might that the ELN have, again, they don't have enough to cover, to fill the gaps that Farc. But they have enough to cause a lot of trouble. And as we know, they are quite reluctant to sit down and try to reach a peace agreement with the government of President Santos.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see if the Farc does indeed get the guarantees that they want in order to get back on the campaign trail. Again, those congressional elections in March, presidential elections in May. It's never dull in Colombia. We'll be watching closely here on the Newsmakers. For now, Louise Winstanley and Javier Farje, thank you very much for joining us.